A millionaire widower had lost hope in Christmas until the cleaning lady's daughter appeared dressed as Santa Claus, bringing a surprise that changed everything. Secrets came to light, and two lonely lives transformed forever. An emotional story about how love can blossom in the most unlikely moments. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment on where you're watching from. The December storm battered New York with an intensity that seemed to reflect David Johnson's mood. From the 40th floor of the corporate building on Fifth Avenue, he watched the raindrops sliding down the bulletproof glass of his office, each carrying with it another fragment of an afternoon that promised to be like all the others, empty, silent, and imbued with the absence of meaning that had become his constant companion. David was the type of man that financial newspapers loved to feature on their covers. At 42, he had built an empire in the tech sector that generated eight-figure revenues. His tailored Italian suit accentuated his upright posture and athletic build, maintained through obsessive workouts at the private gym in his penthouse on the Upper East Side. His black hair, with silver strands at the temples, that gave him an air of distinction, was always impeccably styled. His green eyes, which once sparkled with dreams and ambitions, now carried a calculated coldness that made his employees measure every word before addressing him. But behind this facade of absolute success, David carried a weight that no amount of money could alleviate. 3 years ago, a car accident had taken Emily, his wife, leaving him alone in a 500-square-foot apartment that now echoed only with the sound of his own footsteps. Since then, he had become a voluntary prisoner of his own life, diving into work with an intensity that even worried his most ambitious partners. The office reflected his personality, minimalistic to the extreme, with Scandinavian design furniture in shades of grey and black, abstract paintings that looked more like soulless paint splatters, and a solid mahogany desk where piles of financial reports accumulated like mountains of paper. He climbed daily in search of a purpose that never arrived. The only concession to human warmth was a small photo of Emily, hidden in the bottom right drawer, which he had stopped looking at over a year ago. It was exactly 5:43 p.m. when the sound echoed down the hallway. David lifted his eyes from the numbers dancing before him without making sense, frowning at hearing something completely out of place in that corporate environment. Childish giggles. The sound was so incongruous with the serious atmosphere of the executive floor that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. But then she appeared. A small figure of about 2 years old stumbled through the slightly open door of his office, and David felt his world stop. The child wore a Santa Claus costume that was completely disproportionate to her tiny size. The fake belly wobbled with each uncertain step, the white beard covered half of her round, rosy face, and the red hat constantly slipped over her bright brown eyes. In her small hands, she carried a package that seemed larger and heavier than she was, but she held it with the stubborn determination that only small children possess. "Ho, ho, ho!" she exclaimed in a high-pitched, cheerful voice, slightly tripping over the loose fabric of the costume pants before steadying herself again. Her eyes met David's with absolute confidence, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be there, at that moment, dressed that way. David remained paralyzed in his leather chair, his fingers still hovering over the laptop keyboard. In the 3 years following Emily's death, he had developed an almost pathological aversion to anything related to Christmas. The decorations, the music, the forced smiles of shopkeepers, all of it reminded him of the happiness he once knew and lost. He had given explicit orders for no Christmas decorations to be placed on any of his company's floors, and his employees knew that December was the month when his mood became even darker. But there was that little creature radiating a joy, so pure and genuine that it seemed to cut through the layers of emotional protection he had built around his heart. For a fleeting moment, something stirred in his chest, a feeling long forgotten that made him remember what it was like to feel alive. "My God, Lily, come back here right now!" A female voice, laden with panic and embarrassment, echoed down the hallway a fraction of a second before a woman came rushing after the girl. David looked up and saw a young woman of about 28, her navy blue cleaning uniform clinging to her body from sweat and haste. Her brown hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, with a few rebellious strands escaping and sticking to her damp forehead. Her face, naturally beautiful despite the complete absence of makeup, was flushed with embarrassment and worry. "I'm so sorry, sir. I really am. She slipped away from me for just a second and I—" The woman stopped abruptly upon realizing where she was and who she was speaking to. David Johnson was a legend in the building, the reclusive billionaire businessman whom no one ever saw smile, who worked late into the night and who had turned the 40th floor into an impenetrable fortress of corporate efficiency. Sarah Thompson had started working at Clean Co. 6 months ago, always on the night shift when the building was empty, allowing her to work in peace while Lily slept in a makeshift corner with cushions she brought from home. It was an unofficial arrangement she had negotiated with her supervisor, explaining her situation as a single mother without. Sarah Thompson had conditions to pay for a babysitter. The job didn't pay much, but it was honest, and more importantly, it allowed her to take care of her daughter without depending on anyone. She was 28, but the responsibilities had made her mature beyond her years. She had become a mother at 25 when Lily was born, from a relationship that didn't survive the pressures of unplanned parenthood. Since then, she had become both mother and father to the girl, working 2 jobs during the day, one as a pharmacy clerk in Brooklyn and another doing cleaning jobs in family homes on weekends, before coming to her night shift at the building. Her 2-room apartment in East New York was simple but clean and organized. The walls were decorated with drawings that Lily made and that Sarah taped up as if they were artworks in a museum. The refrigerator, although small and noisy, always had milk for Lily and the basic ingredients for the simple but nutritious meals that Sarah prepared with all the love in the world. "Lily, come here, sweetheart. It's not playtime right now." Sarah stretched her arms toward the girl, trying to keep her voice calm despite her evident nervousness. Her eyes darted quickly between David and her daughter, mentally calculating how long it would take to leave without causing more disruption. But Lily, with the typical stubbornness of a 2-year-old, clutched the package even tighter to her chest and shook her head vigorously, making Santa Claus's fake beard sway back and forth. "No, gift for the sad man," she declared with all the seriousness of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. David blinked slowly, the child's words hitting him like a punch to the stomach. Sad man. That was how a 2-year-old saw him, not as a successful businessman, not as a powerful man, but simply as someone who was sad. The brutal simplicity of the observation left him speechless. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Lily, no! I'm sorry, doctor, she didn't mean... She's very small, she doesn't know." "No." David raised a hand, gently interrupting her. His voice came out rougher than usual, laden with an emotion he couldn't fully identify. "It's okay." He slowly stood up from the chair, his movements deliberate and careful, as if approaching a wild animal that might flee at any moment. Lily watched him curiously, tilting her head like a little bird studying something interesting. "Do you have a gift for me?" David asked, crouching down to be at the girl's height. Up, close, he could see that her eyes were a warm brown, full of life and innocent joy. The Santa Claus outfit was obviously homemade. He could see the uneven stitches and the repurposed fabric from something that must have once been a larger garment. Lily nodded energetically, extending the package toward him. "Christmas gift, so you won't be sad anymore." David looked at Sarah, seeking silent permission. She was clearly mortified, nervously wringing her hands, but she nodded almost imperceptibly. He carefully took the package, surprised by its weight. The wrapping paper was simple, probably remnants from previous birthdays, but it was taped excessively, evidence of the small fingers that had worked hard to make that package. "Can I open it now?" he asked Lily, who clapped her hands excitedly. Inside the wrapping was an old shoebox, and inside the box, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, were several yellowed papers. David furrowed his brow, looking at Sarah for an explanation. I don't know what this is," Sarah murmured, approaching hesitantly. "Lily must have taken it from my bag. They're old papers that belonged to my grandmother. I thought they were just old documents of no importance." David examined the papers more closely. They were legal documents, deeds and certificates that seemed to date back several decades. His business instinct, honed by years of contract analysis, immediately recognized the potential importance of those documents. "Sarah," he said slowly, raising his eyes to meet hers, "I think you should take a closer look at this. These documents, they might be important." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain tapping against the windows and Sarah's heavy breathing, clearly trying to process the entire surreal situation. Lily, unaware of the tension in the room, continued to smile brightly, proud of having delivered her gift. "Thank you, Doctor," Sarah finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we've already taken up too much of your time. We should go now." She reached out her arms to Lily, but the girl ran to David and hugged his legs with all the strength of her little arms. "Did you like the gift?" she asked, looking up expectantly. David felt something break inside his chest, a barrier he had carefully constructed over the past 3 years. He knelt down again and returned the hug, inhaling the scent of baby powder and shampoo that emanated from the girl's curly hair. "It was the best gift I've ever received," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he was speaking absolute truth. Chapter 2. The following week passed in a blur of fragmented images that David couldn't shake from his mind. Every time he tried to focus on the financial reports scattered across his desk, he saw Lily's radiant smile and felt the weight of that sincere hug he had received. It was as if the child had planted a seed of restlessness in his chest, something that grew each day and prevented him from returning to his usual mechanical routine. On the Thursday following their meeting, David made a decision that surprised him. He decided to ask his driver to pick him up from the underground parking lot, as he had done 3 years ago, but instead he chose to walk down to the ground floor and stroll through the streets of the financial district. The cold morning air hit him like a slap, reminding him that there was a world beyond the glass walls of his office. That's how he found her. Sarah was behind the counter of Our Bread Bakery, a small family-owned pastry shop tucked away among the skyscrapers of Fifth Avenue. The establishment was an oasis of warmth amidst the concrete and steel of the area. Light yellow painted exposed brick walls, rustic wooden tables that told stories through their scratches and marks, and the unmistakable aroma of fresh bread and brewed coffee that seemed to embrace anyone who entered. She wore a white apron over a simple blue blouse, her hair tied up in a practical bun that revealed her delicate neck. When she saw him walk in, her eyes widened in surprise, and David noticed how she visibly tensed, straightening her posture and nervously wiping her hands on her apron. "Dr. Johnson, what a surprise to see you here," she said, trying to maintain a professional tone, despite the obvious embarrassment. "What can I get for you?" David approached the glass counter, where golden loaves of bread were displayed, still warm, chocolate truffles perfectly lined up, and pies that looked like they had come straight out of a childhood dream. But his eyes were fixed on Sarah's face, studying the lines of fatigue around her. in brown eyes and the tension in her shoulders. "A coffee and that loaf of sugar bread over there," he said, randomly pointing to one of the loaves. The truth was, he wasn't hungry at all. He had already had his usual morning coffee, a double espresso, and 2 slices of whole-grain toast at his apartment. As Sarah prepared his order, David observed the surroundings with renewed attention. In a corner near the window, there was a small table with coloured pencils scattered around and unfinished drawings. There was Lily, focused on colouring what appeared to be a family of snowmen, her tongue sticking out in absolute concentration. She wore a pink dress with a floral pattern and yellow tights that had a hole at the knee. "Lily comes with me to work," Sarah explained, following his gaze. "The school she attended closed last month due to financial issues, and I'm still trying to find a spot somewhere else that fits my budget." David nodded slowly, absorbing the information. In the world he lived in, problems like school vacancies or tight budgets were distant abstractions. For the first time in years, he was confronted with the reality of how most people actually lived. "And that job at the cleaning company?" he asked casually, but Sarah seemed to shrink even more. "I lost it last week," she admitted quietly, avoiding his gaze. "CleanCo lost the contract with the building where you work. Budget cuts, according to them. I got this job here on Monday. Ms. Rosa needed someone for the morning shift." She placed the coffee and bread on a small tray, her hands trembling slightly. David noticed that her nails, although clean and well-kept, were cut very short, hands of someone who worked hard and didn't have time for vanity. "Santa Claus!" Lily shouted, excitedly, finally noticing his presence. She jumped out of her chair and ran toward him, her little feet making surprisingly loud noises on the ceramic floor. "Hi, Lily," David said, crouching down to her level. "What a beautiful drawing you're making." "It's my family," she proudly explained, holding the paper up for him to see better. The drawing showed 3 figures, a tall woman with long hair, a small child, and to David's surprise, a tall man next to them. "This is me, this is Mommy, and this is you." The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah rushed over to them, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Lily, Dr. Johnson isn't part of our family, sweetheart. He's just an acquaintance," she quickly said, trying to take the drawing from the girl's hands. "But he can be," Lily insisted, clutching the paper to her chest. "He's nice and brought me a present." David frowned. "What present?" Sarah sighed deeply. Yesterday she got a new doll. She came home with a bag from an expensive store at the mall, saying that the sad man had given it to her. "I thought she had imagined it, but it was true," David finished, recalling the call he had made to his assistant the previous morning, asking her to buy some appropriate toys for a 2-year-old girl and discreetly deliver them to the address he had obtained through the CleanCo employee files. "Dr. Johnson, I can't accept this," Sarah said firmly, her voice gaining a strength that David hadn't noticed before. "You don't need to feel sorry for us. We're poor, but we have our dignity." The word dignity hit David like a slap. In the circles he moved in, dignity was something bought with money, earned with power. But here was a woman working 3 jobs to support her daughter, who had lost her job yet still held her head high, speaking of dignity, as if it were the only wealth she possessed. "It's not pity," David said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Lily gave me a gift, so I wanted to give back. That's all." Sarah studied him with wary eyes, trying to decipher his intentions. David realized she was right to be cautious. Rich men who appeared in the lives of vulnerable women rarely did so without ulterior motives. "The gift she gave you," Sarah said hesitantly. "Those papers, you said they could be important. What did you mean by that?" David took a sip of the coffee, which was surprisingly good, much better than the gourmet coffee he was used to. Every day his secretary served him. The flavor was robust and honest, without pretensions. "Old property documents can have legal value," he explained carefully, "especially if they refer to land or properties that have been developed over the years. You should take them to a real estate attorney for a look." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in her voice. "Doctor, do you know how much an attorney costs? I earned $700 here at the bakery. Work as a cleaner on weekends for another $300, and I still have to pay rent, food, and medicine for Lily when she gets sick. Attorneys are for rich people." The brutal simplicity of her response left David in silence. In his world, attorneys were employees he called with a phone call, problems that were solved with signatures on contracts. He had never stopped to think that for most people, justice was an inaccessible luxury. "What if I knew someone who could take a look for free?" he asked carefully. "Why would they do that?" Sarah asked directly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Why would a man like you care about someone like me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with an honesty that David was not used to facing. In the corporate world, favors always came with expectations, kindnesses were investments in future relationships. But there, in that moment, he himself did not know how to answer her question. He began, but was interrupted by the arrival of another customer. "Sarah, good to see you here." The male voice was warm and familiar. David turned and saw a man in his 40s approaching the counter. He was tall, with graying hair at the temples and an easy smile that seemed genuine. He wore a light blue dress shirt without a tie and khaki pants, the kind of man who could look elegant without being intimidating. "Hi, Mr. Armando," Sarah replied, and David noticed how her face lit up genuinely for the first time since he entered the bakery. "How have you been?" "Well, well. And this is the famous Lily?" Armando crouched down to be at the girl's level, who immediately ran to show him her drawing. "Wow, what a beautiful family you drew." David watched the interaction with growing attention. There was a familiarity between Sarah and that man that suggested a relationship that went beyond client and employee. Armando was the owner of the bakery. That became clear when he greeted other employees and checked some operational details with a natural owner's ease. "David Johnson," he introduced himself when Armando finally stood up and extended his hand. "Armando Silva," the man replied, and David saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. "The David Johnson from Johnson Tech?" "Yes." Armando smiled, but David detected a subtle change in his expression, a caution that hadn't been there seconds before. "Interesting to find you here," Armando said carefully. "I didn't imagine you knew our Sarah." The implicit ownership in the pronoun our did not go unnoticed by David. He looked from Armando to Sarah, noticing how she had become visibly uncomfortable with the sudden tension in the air. "We met recently," David replied neutrally. "That's good. Sarah is a special person. She and Lily deserve all the protection and care in the world," Armando said, and although his words were polite, the subtext was clear. David was being evaluated and for now considered a potential threat. Lily, unaware of the tension between the adults, continued playing with her colored pencils, occasionally glancing at the three men with childlike curiosity. David finished his coffee in silence, paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and headed for the door. "It was a pleasure to see you, Sarah," he said formally. "Lily, keep making beautiful drawings." As he walked back to his building, David couldn't shake the image of Sarah from his mind. There was something about her, a combination of vulnerability and strength, sweetness and determination, that intrigued him in a way he hadn't felt in years. But it was also clear that she had protections in her life, people who cared about her and who would not look kindly on the intrusion of a billionaire businessman with unknown motives. For the first time in 3 years, David Johnson had a problem he couldn't solve with money or power. And for the first time in 3 years, that didn't irritate him. On the contrary, it challenged him in a way that made his heart race. Chapter 3. March arrived with the suffocating heat typical of New York summers, but for David, the mornings at Our Bread Bakery had become a sacred ritual. For 3 consecutive weeks, he had shown up promptly at 7:30 in the morning, always ordering the same coffee and sugar bread, exchanging a few polite words with Sarah, and dedicating a few minutes to talking with Lily about her increasingly elaborate drawings. However, that Tuesday morning, something was different. The little table in the corner was empty, and Sarah looked paler than usual, her movements mechanical as she served the morning customers with an efficiency that barely hid the worry etched on her face. "Where is Lily?" David asked as he approached the counter, skipping the usual formalities. Sarah looked up, and David saw that her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "She's at the New York Medical Center," she replied in a hoarse voice. "Pneumonia. It started as a simple cold over the weekend, but last night she began having difficulty breathing and a very high fever." David felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The image of Lily pale and sick in a hospital bed hit him, with a force that surprised him. In recent days, he had found himself thinking about the girl at random moments, during important meetings, in traffic, before sleeping. She had become a constant presence in his thoughts, a small but bright light. He was persistent in his orderly and empty life. "How is she now?" he asked, leaning his hands on the counter. "Stable, according to the doctors. But she will need to stay hospitalized for at least a week, maybe more." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I should be there with her, but I can't miss work. Miss Rosa has been very understanding in letting me leave during the nights to see her, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. David understood perfectly. A single mother couldn't afford to miss work, even when her daughter was hospitalized. The cruel injustice of the situation hit him like a punch to the stomach. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what if I took care of the hospital costs and the time you need to be with her?" The transformation on her face was instantaneous. Vulnerability gave way to a hardness that David recognized as wounded pride. "No." The word came out sharp, definitive. "I already told you I don't need your charity, Dr. Johnson. It's not charity, it's—" David stopped, realizing he didn't know how to name what he felt. Was it genuine concern? Paternal affection for a child he barely knew? Or something more complex, related to the confusing feelings Sarah stirred in him? "What is it?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "You've been coming here for 3 weeks, buying a coffee, and think that gives you the right to decide about our lives. Do you think just because we are poor, we have no choice but to accept whatever comes our way?" The anger in her voice was palpable, and David realized he had crossed an invisible line. But behind the anger, he also detected fear. Fear of creating dependence, fear of opening precedents, fear of losing control over her own life. "You're right," David said slowly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Didn't mean what? To humiliate? To belittle? To make me feel like a beggar?" Sarah was speaking softly to avoid attracting the attention of other customers, but her words carried an intensity that cut through the air between them. David fell silent, absorbing each word like a painful but necessary lesson. In his world, money solved problems, opened doors, brought solutions. He had never considered that offering it could be seen as an offense, a diminishment of someone's dignity. "Sarah, can I talk to you?" Michael's voice interrupted them. He had come out of the kitchen and observed the interaction of the last few minutes with growing attention. "In the kitchen, please." Sarah nodded and asked a colleague to cover the counter. David was left alone, pretending to read the menu while trying to catch fragments of the conversation happening in the back of the bakery. He could only pick up loose words: care, intentions, Lily, responsibility. When Sarah returned, her eyes carefully avoided David's. Michael was with her, and for the first time since they met, his cordial smile had completely disappeared. "Mr. Johnson," Michael said formally, "I think it would be best if you found another place to have your morning coffee." The suggestion, which sounded more like a polite order, caught David by surprise. "Excuse me?" "Sarah is a valuable employee and a dear friend. Lily is like a granddaughter to me. I won't stand by while someone takes advantage of their vulnerable situation." David felt the anger rise in his throat. "Take advantage? What are you talking about?" "Rich men who suddenly appear in the lives of struggling women rarely have pure intentions," Michael replied calmly. But David could see the tension in his shoulders, especially when they insist on offering money after being clearly refused. "Michael, please," Sarah murmured, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "No, Sarah, someone needs to protect you and Lily, since you are too generous to be suspicious of people." Michael stepped closer to David, lowering his voice. "I know who you are, David Johnson. I know you lost your wife a few years ago. I know you are a lonely man with more money than you know what to do with. But Sarah and Lily are not toys to ease your loneliness." David felt as if he had been punched. The accusation was so direct and cruel that for a moment he was left speechless. But worse than the offense was the seed of doubt that Michael's words planted in his mind. Were his intentions really pure? Or was he subconsciously trying to buy a substitute family? "You don't know me," David finally managed to say, his voice low but filled with contained emotion. "Then prove me wrong," Michael shot back. "Leave them alone." David looked at Sarah, hoping she would say something, defend him, or at least soften Michael's words. But she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, and that silence hurt more than any accusation. Without saying anything more, David left money on the counter and walked out of the bakery. The morning heat hit him like a wall, but he barely noticed as he hurried back to his building, his chest tight with a mix of anger, humiliation, and something that took time to recognize as genuine pain. For the rest of the morning, David tried to focus on work, but Michael's words echoed in his mind like an accusatory mantra. Was he really trying to buy the affection of Sarah and Lily? Was his concern genuine, or just a disguised manifestation of his own emotional neediness? Around noon, his assistant, Carla, knocked on the door of his office with a hesitant expression. "Mr. Johnson, there's a call for you. It's from Clean Co., the cleaning company that provided services for the building." David frowned. "What do they want? The contract has already been terminated. It's about a former employee, Sarah Thompson. They said it's urgent." David felt his heart race. "Put the call through." The voice of the manager at Clean Co. was nervous and apologetic. "Mr. Johnson, I know this is irregular, but I didn't know who else to turn to. Sarah Thompson, who worked cleaning your floor. Sarah was at the hospital with her daughter. She reached out asking for a loan from the company's emergency fund, but, well, she no longer worked with us, so technically she wasn't entitled to it." "And why is she calling me?" David asked, although he already suspected the answer. "Because she mentioned that she knows you. She said you might be able to give her a reference, confirm that she is a person of character, hard-working. The hospital is charging for some tests that her basic health insurance doesn't cover." David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the irony of the situation. Sarah had vehemently refused his direct help, but indirectly she was asking him to intervene for her. Was her pride speaking louder than Sophia's well-being? Or was there something deeper at play? "How much does she need?" David asked. $3,000 for the tests and some special medications. To David, $3,000 was less than the price of a bottle of wine in his cellar. For Sarah, it represented months of hard work. Make the loan, David said. I'll cover the amount, but there's one condition. She can't know the money came from me. Tell her it was an exceptional decision from the company's board, considering her good track record. Understood, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much. David hung up the phone and stared out the window, watching the frantic movement of Fifth Avenue below. People rushing back and forth, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories of struggle and hope. That afternoon, he made a decision that surprised him. Instead of going straight home after work, he took his personal car, a black Mercedes sedan that he rarely drove, and headed to the New York Medical Center. He found Sarah in the pediatric ward hallway, uncomfortably sleeping in a plastic chair next to Sophia's room door. She was wearing the same wrinkled and stained work clothes from the morning, and her hair had escaped from the bun, framing her pale face in a messy halo. David approached quietly and saw Sophia through the room window. The girl was awake, playing with a doll, the same one he had sent weeks earlier. She looked too small in the hospital bed, with thin tubes connected to her little arm and a pulse oximeter on her finger, but her eyes still sparkled with the same liveliness as always. "Dr. Johnson?" Sarah had woken up and was looking at him with surprise and confusion. "How is she?" David asked, keeping his voice low so as not to wake other patients. Sarah rubbed her eyes, trying to orient herself. "Better. The tests came back good. The doctor said she could be discharged tomorrow if she doesn't have a fever tonight." "That's great." David hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Sarah, about this morning, I want to apologize. Michael was right. I had no right to interfere in your life that way." Sarah studied him carefully, trying to decipher his intentions. "Why are you here, Dr. Johnson? Michael made it very clear that Michael was protecting you. I understand that, and he was right to be suspicious of my motivations." David sat in the chair next to her, keeping a respectful distance. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Since then, my life has been empty. When Sophia showed up in my office that day, it was like a ray of sunshine had entered my life for the first time in a long time." Sarah remained silent, but David could see she was listening intently. "Maybe Michael is right. Maybe I'm trying to fill a void in my life through you two. But that doesn't change the fact that I genuinely care about Sophia's well-being, and yours too." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Simply." David thought for a long moment before responding. "Because you two reminded me that there is still genuine kindness in the world. That there are still people who fight with dignity, who love unconditionally, who find joy in the little things. Sophia gave me the best gift I've ever received, not the papers that were in the wrapping, but the memory of what it feels like to hope again." Tears began to stream down Sarah's cheeks. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of depending on someone. Afraid of Sophia getting used to things I can't give her. Afraid that when you get tired of playing family, we'll be devastated." Her voice was just a thread, laden with a raw vulnerability that cut through David's heart. David hesitantly reached out his hand, and when Sarah didn't pull away, he gently touched her arm. "I'm not playing family, Sarah. I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I know it's not a game." At that moment, Sophia noticed his presence through the window and waved energetically, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to heal all the wounds in the world. David waved back, feeling his heart tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "She likes you," Sarah observed softly, "and I like her a lot." "And you," David admitted, the words slipping out before he could censor them. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities, unconfessed fears, and unacknowledged hopes. Outside, the day was ending, painting the sky of New York with shades of orange and pink. But here, in that hospital corridor, something new was beginning to blossom between two people who had learned to protect themselves from the disappointments of life, but who might just be ready to take a risk. Again. Continue 1528, Chapter 4. The documents scattered across the mahogany table of the law office seemed too small to carry such historical weight. David watched Sarah carefully flip through each yellowed page, her fingers trembling slightly as Dr. Henry Johnson, one of the best real estate attorneys in New York, explained the legal implications of each document. It had been 2 weeks since the episode at the hospital, 2 weeks of a delicate dance between David and Sarah, made up of casual encounters at Our Bread Bakery that didn't seem so casual after all, conversations that started about Lily and ended up revealing pieces of their own stories, glances that lasted a second longer than appropriate between acquaintances. "Ms. Thompson," Dr. Johnson said, adjusting his glasses on his aristocratic nose, "what you have here is extraordinary. These documents prove that your great-grandmother, Mrs. Constance Thompson, owned a 5-acre plot in Newark, acquired in 1943. Sarah looked at David in confusion. "But doctor, Newark nowadays, that can't be worth much, right? It's just the outskirts." Dr. Johnson smiled, the kind of smile that expensive lawyers make when they have good news that will yield substantial fees. "My dear lady, the area where your great-grandmother's land was located now houses part of the Westfield Garden State Plaza and 2 high-end residential condominiums. The current value of that land is estimated at approximately $15 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah paled so much that David worried she might faint. He discreetly pushed a glass of water in her direction. "15 million, she murmured, as if repeating words in a foreign language. "There is a legal complexity, of course," Dr. Johnson continued, organizing the papers into neat piles. "The land was the subject of a legal dispute in the 80s when it was illegally occupied and later sold to a developer without the knowledge of the legitimate heirs. But with these documents, we have a solid basis for a reclamation action." David watched Sarah process the information, seeing a storm of emotions cross her face: shock, hope, fear, disbelief. He himself was impressed. When he suggested she seek a lawyer, he expected perhaps a small settlement, not an amount that would completely change her life. "How long would such a lawsuit take?" David asked when it became clear that Sarah was temporarily unable to form complete sentences. "Between 2 and 3 years, considering the inevitable appeals. The developer and the current owners will certainly fight. But Mr. Johnson told me that the fees would be covered, so—" "No!" Sarah finally found her voice, abruptly standing up from the chair. "No, I can't accept this. David, you've already done too much." David sighed. He had anticipated this reaction and had spent the last few days thinking about how to navigate it. "Sarah, think about Lily. Think about the future you can provide for her. Think about what I will owe you," she retorted, and David saw tears of frustration forming in her eyes. $15 million, David. How am I going to pay legal fees for a case this size? Dr. Johnson diplomatically cleared his throat. "Actually, Ms. Thompson, there is a possibility of working with contingency fees. You would only pay if we win the case." "And what would the percentage be?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "Typically, 20% of the recovered amount." Sarah did the math quickly, and David saw the exact moment she realized that $3 million was still an unimaginable sum for someone in her situation. "Dr. Johnson," David intervened carefully, "what would happen if someone made an anonymous donation to a legal assistance fund that covered the costs of this specific case?" The lawyer smiled. "Perfectly legal and not uncommon in cases of social interest." "David, no," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not going to—" "You won't accept charity, I know," David interrupted her. "But what if it were a loan, with interest, formal contract, everything above board? You would pay it back when you won the case." Sarah studied him with narrowed eyes. And if I lost? Then you would lose. I have enough money to absorb that loss without it affecting my life at all. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice heavy with frustration and something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. David looked into her eyes and decided to be completely honest. Because in 6 months, you and Lily have changed my life more than I have managed to change it in the last 3 years. Because when I wake up in the morning, I think of both of you. Because Lily makes me laugh, and you make me want to be a better person. And because... He hesitated, then decided to dive in head first. Because I am in love with you. The silence that followed was so profound that David could hear the ticking of the old clock on the office wall. Dr. Johnson discreetly found something very interesting to examine in his papers. David, Sarah began, but he raised a hand. Let me finish. I'm not doing this to buy your affection. I'm not doing this expecting something in return. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Lily deserves a future. You deserve justice. And if my money can help with that, then let me help. Sarah slowly sat down, covering her face with her hands. David could see her shoulders shaking and had to resist the impulse to go to her and wrap her in his arms. I need to think, she finally said, her voice muffled by her hands. Of course, Dr. Johnson, can we have a few days to decide? Certainly, but I must warn you that the longer we wait, the harder it may become. Statutes of limitations, changes in legislation, death of potential witnesses. David saw Sarah shudder and knew she was thinking the same thing he was. What if they lost this opportunity because of her pride? They left the office in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them like a heavy cloud. On the sidewalk of Park Avenue, David stopped and turned to Sarah. Do you want to have lunch with me? We can pick up Lily from the bakery and... David, stop! Sarah interrupted him, finally looking directly into his eyes. I need you to understand one thing. My whole life since Lily was born has been a struggle to maintain our independence, to prove that I don't need anyone, that I can take care of her on my own. David nodded, hoping she would continue. But you... She sighed deeply. You showed up, and suddenly everything I built, all my strength, seems to be crumbling. And I don't know if it's because you're offering me things I've always wanted for Lily, or if it's because... She paused, biting her lip. Because what? Because I'm also falling for you, she admitted softly, and that terrifies me. David felt his heart race. Why does it terrify you? Because men like you don't end up with women like me. Because I'm afraid of getting used to this life, of Lily getting used to it, and then you realizing you could have any woman in the world and deciding that a housekeeper with a daughter is an unnecessary burden. The raw pain in her voice hit David like a physical slap. He took a step toward her, stopping only when he saw she was trembling. Sarah, do you think I'm the kind of man who plays with people's feelings? I don't know what kind of man you are, she replied honestly. I know you're rich, powerful, handsome, and smart. I know you lost your wife and that you're alone, but I don't know if what you feel for me is true love or just disguised loneliness. David was silent for a long moment, digesting her words. It was a fair question, and he needed to be completely honest with himself before answering. You're right to be afraid, he finally said. I haven't had a serious relationship since Emily died. I don't know how to be someone's boyfriend again. I don't know how to be a father figure to Lily. I might be confusing gratitude with love, or trying to fill a void in my life through you two. Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. But, David continued, I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is you both. I know Lily makes me smile in a way I thought would never be possible again. I know you are the strongest, bravest, and most principled woman I've ever met. And I know I want to find out what could exist between us, even if it means risking getting hurt again." Sarah studied him for a long moment, searching for signs of insincerity or manipulation on his face. David let her look, keeping his expression completely open and vulnerable. "And what? About the money?" she asked. "Money has nothing to do with how I feel about you. If you were a millionaire and I was poor, I would still be here. I would still want to be with you." David paused. "But I can't pretend that money doesn't exist. I can't pretend that I don't see your struggles and that I don't want to help. The question is, can we find a way for me to help that doesn't compromise your dignity?" Sarah was silent for a long time, watching the movement of Fifth Avenue, the mirrored buildings reflecting the afternoon sun, people rushing by, each absorbed in their own personal dramas. "If I accept the loan," she finally said, "it has to be a real contract, market interest rates, collateral, no favoritism." David nodded immediately. "Of course. And that doesn't change anything between us. I won't be with you because you helped me financially." "Understood. And if things don't work out between us, the loan remains valid under the same terms." "Obviously." Sarah studied him once more, then extended her hand. "Then we have a deal." David took her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "We have a deal." But when he tried to release her hand, Sarah held on for a moment longer. "David." "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, but mostly for giving me a choice." David smiled, the first genuine and carefree smile he had given in years. "Thank you for letting me try." As they walked back to the bakery to pick up Lily, David felt something he had completely forgotten how it felt. Hope. Not the vague hope that life would get better someday, but the specific and tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found something real and lasting with these two extraordinary people who had entered his life dressed as Santa Claus on an ordinary December afternoon. Continue, 1533, Chapter 5. May arrived with the traditional community fairs spread throughout New York, and the East New York neighborhood was no exception. The central square had been transformed into a small fairground, with colorful flags fluttering in the wind, stalls of typical foods exuding aromas of peanut candy and spiced hot cider, and a central bonfire already crackling joyfully at the center of it all, even with the sun still high in the sky. David nervously adjusted the plaid shirt he had bought, especially for the occasion. It was the first time in his adult life that he was attending a real community fair, not the themed corporate events his company organized, but a genuine celebration of the community. Sarah had hesitantly invited him 3 days earlier, and he had immediately accepted, excited at the prospect of getting to know her world better. "Santa Claus!" Lily shouted as soon as she spotted him approaching the stall where she and Sarah were. The girl was wearing a red dress with white polka dots and a crown of yellow flowers that Sarah had made with her own hands. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she ran toward David, who picked her up and spun her in the air, eliciting crystal-clear laughter from her. "Look how beautiful you are," David said, adjusting the tiara that had slipped. "A real little country girl." Sarah approached, and David felt the breath escape from his lungs. She was wearing a blue dress that highlighted the color of her eyes, with a modest neckline that showcased the delicacy of her neck. Her hair was down and had taken on natural waves that framed her face. She wore light makeup, just pink lipstick, and mascara, but to David, she had never looked more beautiful. "You came," she said. He said, smiling with a shyness that didn't match the strong woman he had come to know. "She said she would come," David replied, setting Lily down but keeping his eyes fixed on Sarah. "You look stunning." Sarah blushed slightly. In the past few weeks, since the conversation in Dr. Johnson's office, they had developed a cautious intimacy. The tension of their first meetings was gone, as was the excessive formality, but they had not yet crossed the line into something definitively romantic. It was like a delicate dance, where each tested the other's limits without forcing the rhythm. "Come on, I want to introduce you to everyone," Sarah said, taking his hand naturally. David was introduced as a friend to what seemed like half the neighborhood. Mrs. Johnson, a 70-year-old lady who lived in the same building as Sarah, studied him from head to toe with experienced eyes and murmured something about "lucky girl" in the ear of another neighbor. Mr. Roberts, the owner of the corner grocery store, shook David's hand with unnecessary force and made a point to mention that he looked after the girls like family. The real surprise came when David saw Michael approaching. The bakery owner was wearing a white dress shirt with a red bow tie, his grey hair carefully styled. He was holding 2 cups of spiced hot cider and headed straight for Sarah. "Marie," he said affectionately, offering one of the cups to her, "I brought your favorite spiced hot cider. Extra cinnamon, just how you like it." David watched the interaction with growing attention. There was an intimacy there, a knowledge of personal preferences that suggested a deeper relationship than he had imagined. Sarah accepted the cup with a warm smile that made something tighten in David's chest. "Hi, Michael," David greeted politely. "David," Michael replied with a nod that was far from friendly. "I didn't expect to see you here. Sarah invited me." "That's good," Michael said, but his tone suggested exactly the opposite. The tension between the 2 men was palpable, and Sarah clearly noticed it. "Michael, why don't you get a spiced hot cider for David too? I'm sure he would like to try it." "Sure," Michael agreed, but David noticed how he hesitated before stepping away, casting a protective glance at Sarah. "He seems very close to you," David commented when they were momentarily alone. Sarah sighed. "Michael is a good friend. He helped me a lot when Lily was little and I needed work. He gave me opportunities when no one else would. And he never wanted something more than friendship." Sarah looked directly into David's eyes. "Yes, he did, and he still does. But I have always been clear about my feelings, or rather, about the lack of them." David felt a relief he preferred not to analyze too deeply. "And now, with what's happening between us? Now he's worried. He thinks you're going to hurt me. And you, what do you think?" Sarah fell silent for a moment, watching Lily play with other children near the bonfire. "I think every relationship has risks. The question is whether it's worth taking the risk. Is it worth it?" She turned to him, and David saw something different in her eyes, a decision being made in real time. "Let's find out." Before David could respond, Lily came running toward them, holding a corn on the cob bigger than her head. "Mummy, look what Uncle John gave me. Be careful, Princess, it's hot," Sarah warned, helping her daughter hold the corn without burning herself. The fair continued with live music from a local country duo, traditional dances that David watched with fascination, and a variety of typical games he had never experienced. Sarah tried to teach him how to dance the quadrilla, laughing at his disastrous attempts to follow the steps, while Lily cheered enthusiastically. It was during the fishing game, a game where children fished for prizes with improvised rods, that the accident happened. Lily was focused on trying to fish a pink teddy bear when she tripped over the cord of a tent near the bonfire. David saw everything happen in slow motion, the girl losing her balance, stumbling toward the flames, her little hands instinctively reaching out for support. He didn't think, he just reacted. David lunged forward, wrapping Lily in his arms and turning his body to shield her from the flames. He felt the intense heat hit his back, the fire licking at the sleeve of his shirt before other men could pull them away from the bonfire. "Lily! Lily!" Sarah screamed, running toward them. Her hands trembled as she examined her daughter, looking for injuries. "She's fine," David said quickly, though his voice came out hoarse from adrenaline. "She didn't get hurt." It was only then that Sarah noticed the charred sleeve of his shirt and the expression of pain he was trying to hide. "David, your arm!" David looked down and saw the burn on his right forearm, a red and irritated mark where the fabric of the shirt had stuck to his skin. The pain was intense, but all he could think about was the relief that Lily was unharmed. "It's nothing serious," he lied, trying to downplay the situation. "This isn't serious," Sarah asked incredulously, examining the burn. "We need to go to a hospital." "No need for a hospital," Mrs. Johnson intervened, who had approached with a first aid kit. "I have burn ointment here. I'll take care of him." As the lady cleaned and treated the wound with the experienced hands of someone who had raised 6 children, David held Lily in his arms, whispering soothing words in her ear. The girl was clearly shaken by the scare, but she wasn't crying, just clinging to his neck tightly. "You saved me," she murmured against his neck. "I'll always save you," David replied automatically, and only later realized the weight of the words he had said. Sarah was beside them, watching the scene with an expression that David couldn't fully decipher. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something deeper, a raw emotion that made her eyes shine with contained tears. "David," she began, but her voice faltered. "It's okay," he said softly. "It was just instinct." "No," she shook her head. "It wasn't just instinct. You risked your own safety for my daughter without even thinking twice." Michael approached at that moment, carrying a glass of cold water and a clean towel. David expected to see satisfaction or a "I told you so" in his eyes, but instead found something unexpected: respect. That was... Michael paused, searching for the right words. That was what a father would do. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. David felt Lily snuggle even closer to him, and when he looked at Sarah, he saw tears finally streaming down her cheeks. "Why are you crying, Mommy?" Lily asked, reaching out a tiny hand to touch her mother's face. "Because sometimes, when people do very beautiful things, our hearts get so full that they need to overflow," Sarah explained, her voice thick with emotion. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur. David remained seated on a bench near the fire pit, now at a safe distance, with Lily asleep in his lap. His arm ached, but he refused any painkillers, preferring to keep his mind clear. Sarah didn't leave his side for a minute, sometimes checking his bandage, sometimes just sitting next to him in comfortable silence. When it was time to leave, Michael approached again. This time he extended his hand to David. "Thank you," he said simply, "for protecting our princess." David shook the offered hand. "Our princess? Lily is special to many people here, but—" Michael hesitated, then looked directly into David's eyes. "I think you understand what she means better than I thought." During the drive back home, David had insisted on taking them in the car, despite Sarah's protests that taking 3 buses was perfectly acceptable. Lily slept in the back seat, while Sarah and David spoke softly. "How's the pain?" she asked for the 10th time. "Bearable," David replied, carefully shifting gears to avoid straining his injured arm. "David?" "Yes?" "What? You said to Lily about always saving her." David kept his eyes on the road, but his voice carried a seriousness that cut through the air between them. "I meant every word." Sarah was silent for a long moment. "And what if I said I'm ready?" "Ready for what?" "To stop being afraid, to stop making excuses, to accept that maybe you are different from all the other men I've known." David parked the car in front of Sarah's building and turned to look at her. In the dim light of the street lamp, she looked even more beautiful, but also vulnerable in a way that made his heart race. "Sarah, I love you," she said quickly, as if the words would burn her mouth if kept inside any longer. "I know it's too soon. I know it might be crazy, but I almost lost Lily today and realized that life is too short to waste time being afraid." David felt as if the world had stopped spinning. For 3 years, he had believed he would never feel something like this again. And now, there was Sarah, brave and beautiful and in love, offering her heart with the same generosity she brought to everything in life. "I love you too," he admitted, and the words sounded like a promise. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone again." They kissed there, in the front seat of the car, with Lily sleeping peacefully in the back, and the community fair still echoing in the distance. It was a gentle kiss, full of unspoken promises and possible futures, a kiss that sealed something that had begun with a child dressed as Santa Claus and was now blossoming into something real and lasting. When they finally pulled apart, David rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" Sarah smiled, the first completely unreserved smile he had seen from her. "Now we figure out how to be a family." Chapter 6. Sarah's apartment in East New York was exactly as David had imagined, small but immaculately clean and full of love. 2 rooms that she had transformed into a cozy home through small, thoughtful details. Plants in the living room window, drawings from Lily stuck on the fridge like art in a museum, colorful cushions on the 2-seater sofa that she had bought used and refurbished with her own hands. David was sitting on that same sofa, watching Sarah carefully change the bandage on his arm in the soft light of Saturday morning. Her hands were delicate yet firm, and he found himself paying more attention to the concentration on her face than to the pain of the injury. "It's healing well," she murmured, applying a new layer of ointment. Mrs. Johnson knew what she was doing. "Sarah," David said softly, covering her free hand with his, "we need to talk about some things." She looked up, and David saw a shadow of apprehension cross her face. "What kind of things?" "Practical things. If we're really going to try this, the 3 of us as a family, there are some complications we need to discuss." Sarah finished securing the bandage and pulled back slightly, creating space between them. David recognized the movement. It was how she protected herself when she felt vulnerable. "What kind of complications?" David took a deep breath. He had spent the whole night thinking about this conversation, trying to find a way to address delicate subjects without sounding condescending or insensitive. "First, the social difference between us. I move in circles where people will judge you, question your motivations, assume terrible things about our relationship." Sarah stiffened. "And does that bother you?" "It bothers me because it will bother you. I don't care what those people think, but I know that you do." "Importing." Before Sarah could respond, Lily came running from the small bedroom, still in her pajamas, carrying her favorite doll. "Good morning, Santa Claus," she shouted cheerfully, climbing onto the sofa to snuggle in David's lap. "Good morning, Princess," David replied, adjusting her comfortably. The ease with which Lily fit into his arms still surprised him. "Are you staying for a breakfast?" Lily asked hopefully. David looked at Sarah, seeking guidance. They had arrived late from the party the night before, and he had slept on the sofa, a decision made silently by both, with no discussion about what it meant or didn't mean. "If your mum lets you," David replied diplomatically. "Of course she can stay," Sarah said, getting up to head to the small kitchen. "But we don't have much here. Coffee, bread, butter." "That's perfect," David said sincerely. And it was true. There was something comforting in the simplicity of that morning, so different from the elaborate breakfasts served by staff in his empty apartment. While Sarah prepared the coffee, David helped Lily get dressed, a task he found to be more challenging than any business negotiation. When they finally managed to get her head through the right hole of her shirt, they were both laughing. "You're not very good at this," Lily observed with the brutal honesty typical of a 2-year-old. "I'm learning," David admitted. "Can you teach me?" Lily nodded solemnly, as if taking on a very important responsibility. During breakfast, David resumed the conversation they had started earlier. "Sarah, about what we discussed before, there are other things we need to consider. Like what? She asked, spreading jelly on Lily's bread. Safety, for example. People in my position are sometimes targets. If you and Lily were with me publicly, you would need protection. Sarah stopped spreading jelly. What kind of protection? Discreet security, security systems, moving to a safer place. Move from here? Sarah looked around the small apartment with an alarmed expression. David, this is our home. I know, and I understand that it's important to you. But think about Lily. In a bigger, safer place, she would have her own room, a garden to play in, and she would be away from everything she knows, from neighbors who are like family, from the school I finally managed to enroll her in, from her friends. David saw that he had touched a sensitive point and backed off. It doesn't have to be immediate. We can think about it calmly. But the damage was done. Sarah had visibly withdrawn, and David realized that he had inadvertently confirmed one of her fears, that he would try to change her life to fit into his. Is Mommy mad? Lily asked, sensing the tension in the air with the heightened sensitivity of children. No, sweetheart, Mommy isn't mad, Sarah replied softly, but David saw tears forming in her eyes. After breakfast, while Lily watched cartoons on the small TV, David and Sarah sat on the tiny balcony that overlooked other identical buildings. I messed everything up, didn't I? David asked. You didn't mess anything up, but... Sarah sighed deeply. David, do you realize what you're asking? For me to abandon my whole life, everything Lily knows, to live in your world. That's not what I'm asking, isn't it? Then explain to me how it would work. Would you live here? In this 2-room apartment, climbing 3 flights of stairs, sharing a parking space with 8 neighbors? David fell silent. The truth was that he hadn't considered that possibility. He couldn't imagine how his professional life would function, living in East New York, an hour and a half away from his office in traffic. That's what I thought, Sarah said bitterly. You want me to fit into your life, but you're not willing to fit into mine. Sarah, it's not that simple. My job, my responsibilities. And what about my responsibilities? My job, my family. She gestured toward the building. Mrs. Johnson helped me when Lily had pneumonia. Mr. Roberts gave me credit at the grocery store when I was out of money. These neighbors take care of Lily as if she were their own daughter. And you want me to abandon all of that because it doesn't fit into your idea of how our life should be? David felt like he was navigating dangerous waters without a map. Every word he said seemed to sink him deeper. I don't want you to abandon anything. I want you both to be safe. I want Lily to have the best opportunities. And you think she can't have good opportunities living here? Sarah stood up abruptly. Do you think that because we're poor, we can't raise a happy and well-educated child? That's not it. Then what is it, David? Explain to me how our life together would look. Specifically. David fell silent for a long moment, realizing he didn't have an adequate answer. He had fantasized about having a family again, but he hadn't truly thought about the logistics of blending 2 such different worlds. We need to find a middle ground, he finally said. A middle ground, Sarah repeated, and David could hear the disappointment in her voice. Like you living in your penthouse on the Upper East Side and us visiting on weekends. Like me being your secret girlfriend that you can't introduce to your wealthy friends. Sarah, please. You know what, David? Maybe Michael was right. Maybe you're just playing house, and when reality hits, you'll realize it's too complicated and go back to your safe, lonely life. Sarah's words hit David like physical blows. He stood up, feeling anger rising in his chest, not at her but at himself for not anticipating these issues, for not thinking beyond the romantic aspect of the situation. You're being unfair, he said, trying to keep his voice low so as not to alarm Lily. I'm being realistic. Do you want to know what the difference is? At that moment, Lily appeared on the balcony, her big eyes worried. Why are you two fighting? David and Sarah exchanged glances, both realizing that they had allowed their frustrations to affect Lily. Sarah knelt down to be at the girl's level. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things, sweetheart. It doesn't mean they don't care about each other. Lily looked from her mother to David, then ran to him and hugged his leg. You're not leaving, right, Santa Claus? David knelt down and picked Lily up in his arms, feeling his heart break at her innocent question. I will never leave on my own, Princess. Sarah watched him, and David saw something change in her expression. Anger was giving way to deep sadness. But maybe you have to go, don't you? She said softly. David looked into her eyes, then at Lily in his arms, and for the first time since he fell in love with both of them, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe love wasn't enough. Maybe there were obstacles too great to overcome, differences too deep to reconcile. I don't know, he admitted honestly, but I know I want to try to find a solution. Sarah nodded slowly. Then let's try. But David, the next time we have this conversation, I want you to think not just about what you want for us, but what we are willing to give up to be with you, and if it's worth it. David spent the rest of the morning with them, playing with Lily and chatting about trivial things with Sarah, but the tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud. When he left in the late afternoon, they all knew something had changed, that a line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. In the elevator of his own building that night, David looked at himself in the mirrored reflection and saw a man who had conquered the business world, but was completely lost when it came to navigating the complexities of a real family. For the first time in his successful career, David Johnson didn't know if he would be able to find a solution to the most important problem of his life. Chapter 7. David's office on the 40th floor had never seemed so cold and impersonal as it did that June Monday. 3 days had passed since the argument in Sarah's apartment. 3 days of heavy silence where neither had reached out to the other. David had thrown himself into work with an intensity that even worried his assistant Carla, who had known him for 8 years and rarely saw him so visibly disturbed. It was around 10 in the morning when Carla knocked on his office door, carrying a cup of coffee and a hesitant expression. Mr. Johnson, there's someone here who would like to speak with you, a Mr. Michael Smith. David looked up from the reports he was pretending to read. He had actually read the same page 5 times without absorbing a single word. Michael, from the bakery. Yes, sir. He said it was about Miss Thompson and her daughter. David felt his stomach tighten. Is something wrong? Are they okay? He didn't say, sir. Just asked for a few minutes of your time. David nodded, trying to mask the anxiety that overtook him. Send him in. Michael entered the room with the same confident demeanor he displayed at the bakery, but David noticed his eyes carefully scanning the environment, the expensive artwork, the panoramic view of New York, the mahogany desk that cost more than most people earned in a year. Mr. Johnson, Michael greeted formally. Michael, please have a seat. David gestured to one of the armchairs in front of his desk. Are they okay? Sarah and Lily? Physically, yes. Emotionally? Michael paused, studying David carefully. Sarah is struggling, and Lily keeps asking where you are. David briefly closed his eyes, feeling a pang of pain in his chest. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to make things worse. And do you think staying silent will make it better? Michael leaned forward. Look, David, I came here against all my instincts. I don't trust you. I think Sarah and Lily deserve someone better. David braced himself for an argument, but Michael raised a hand. But, he continued, I saw how Lily smiles when she talks about you. I saw how Sarah has changed in the past few weeks, happier, more hopeful, and most importantly, I saw you throwing yourself into the fire to protect Lily. A man. Who does that? Well, maybe I'm wrong about your intentions. What do you want from me, Michael? I want you to be honest. Sarah is a proud woman, but she is also in love with you. If you aren't sure about what you want, if you're not willing to fight for them, then let them go now, before Lily gets more attached, before Sarah gets hurt beyond recovery. David stood up and walked to the window, watching the frenetic movement of the city below. It's not that simple. Why isn't it? David turned to face Michael. Because we come from different worlds. Because I don't know how to make this work without asking her to give up everything she knows. Because I'm afraid that in the end, I'll just hurt them even more. And do you think she doesn't know that? Michael asked. Do you think Sarah is naive? She knows exactly who you are, where you come from, what you represent, and yet she chose to love you. David fell silent, processing the words. Do you know what your problem is, David? Michael continued. You're trying to solve everything on your own. You're trying to find the perfect solution that won't hurt anyone, that won't require sacrifices from anyone. But relationships don't work that way. How do they work then? With mutual concessions, with communication, with both sides willing to give up some things to gain more important ones. Michael stood up. Sarah doesn't need you to solve all her problems. She needs you to be present, to be her partner, not her savior. David absorbed the words in silence. There was truth there that he didn't want to admit. Can I ask you a question? David finally said. Of course. Why are you doing this? Helping us? If you have feelings for her, Michael smiled sadly, because I love her enough to want to see her happy, and as much as it pains me to admit, you make her happy in a way that I never could. The silence that followed was heavy with mutual respect. David saw in Michael something he recognized and admired, the ability to put the well-being of someone he loves above his own desires. What did she say about the conversation on Saturday? David asked. That you want her to fit into your world, but you're not willing to fit into hers. Michael paused. Is she right? David thought carefully before responding. I don't know. I think I'm afraid to try and find out that I can't. And she's afraid to try and find out that you don't really want her. How do we get out of this impasse? Michael smiled, the first genuine smile since he entered the room. By talking. Being honest about what you want and what you're willing to give, building something new together, instead of trying to fit into the lives that already exist. After Michael left, David was alone in his office, staring at the phone and trying to find the courage to make a call. When he finally dialed the number of the bakery, it was Sarah who answered. Our bread bakery. Good morning. Sarah? It's me. A silence. David could hear the background noise of the bakery, conversations, the clatter of dishes, the coffee machine. David, can we talk? Tonight? I would like to try again. For real this time. Another pause. David held his breath. Lily has been asking about you, Sarah finally said. And you? I've missed you too, she admitted, and David felt something loosen in his chest. What time do you get off work? At 6. Can I pick you up? I thought we could go out for dinner, somewhere Lily likes. David, please, let me try to do this right. David heard Sarah sigh softly. McDonald's on East 14th Street. Lily loves the playground there. David smiled. McDonald's. When was the last time he had been to one? Perfect. See you at 6:30. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and mental preparation. David cancelled 2 important meetings, something he had never done for personal reasons. At 5 in the evening, He was driving toward the bakery, mentally rehearsing what he would say. When he arrived, he found Sarah and Lily waiting on the sidewalk. Lily was wearing a little yellow dress with a floral print, and when she saw David, she ran to him with her arms open. "Santa Claus, you're back!" David picked her up, inhaling the familiar scent of children's shampoo and talcum powder. "Of course I'm back, Princess. I said I would always come back." Sarah approached more slowly, her eyes studying his face. "How are you?" "Confused, missing you, determined to make this work," David replied honestly. At McDonald's, while Lily played in the playground under the watchful eyes of both, David and Sarah talked. Not about logistics or practical issues, but about feelings, fears, and hopes. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," David began, "about fitting into your life instead of waiting for you to fit into mine. And I think you were right. I was trying to solve everything from my point of view, as if my way of living was necessarily better." Sarah fiddled with the straw of her soda. "And now I want to try to build something new. Not your life, not my life, but our life, together." "How?" David took a deep breath. "What if I bought an apartment in a middle-ground neighborhood? Not East New York, but also not the Upper East Side. A place where Lily could keep some of her routines, but that would be safe and comfortable for all of us." Sarah looked up, surprised. "Would you do that?" "I would. And more. What if I invested some of my time in social projects in the area? Microcredit, education programs. A way to give back to the community. That gave me you two." Sarah was silent for a long moment, watching Lily slide down the playground with contagious joy. "And your job, your responsibilities?" "I'll adapt. Maybe work more from home, use technology for some meetings. Delegate more." David took her hand across the table. "Sarah, you and Lily are more important than any business." "David, let me finish. I'm not saying it will be easy. We'll have to navigate uncharted waters, face judgments, learn to be a family. But I want to try, for real, not my way, but our way." Sarah squeezed his hand, tears forming in her eyes. "And if it doesn't work?" "And if it does," David countered, "what if we find out that love can truly overcome differences? What if we build something better than either of us could have alone?" Lily came running back to the table at that moment, her cheeks flushed from playing. "Can I have a milkshake?" "Of course, Princess," David and Sarah answered at the same time, then looked at each other and laughed. "Is this how it's going to be now?" Sarah asked, smiling. "Us both spoiling her." "Absolutely," David replied, smiling back. "And you too." As Lily savored her strawberry milkshake, David and Sarah began to make real plans. Not romantic fantasies, but concrete steps to build a life together. For the first time since they met, David felt that maybe, just maybe, they could really make this work. Chapter 8. The three-bedroom apartment in Queens was empty, with that characteristic smell of fresh paint and new varnish that accompanies all newly delivered properties. David walked through the spacious and well-lit area, trying to imagine what it would be like to live there with Sarah and Lily as they explored each room with the curiosity of... Lily was seeing her future home for the first time. "Mummy, look at this big room," Lily shouted from what would be her future bedroom, her voice echoing off the still bare walls. "Can I put my drawings here?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah replied, but David noticed the hesitation in her voice. In the last 2 weeks, since they had officially decided to live together, she had fluctuated between excitement and apprehension, like someone about to jump off a cliff without being sure if their wings would work. David approached her in the main room, where a whole wall of glass offered an impressive view of downtown. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful," Sarah admitted, but her arms were crossed defensively. "Much bigger than anywhere I've ever lived." "But do you like it?" Sarah turned to face him directly. David, this apartment costs more per month than I earned in an entire year. How am I supposed to feel at home in a place like this? David had anticipated this concern. It's not just your apartment, Sarah. It's ours. And besides... He hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. If we're going to be a real family, we'll eventually get married. Everything that's mine will be ours. The mention of marriage made Sarah blush slightly. They had talked about the subject a few times, always indirectly, as something that would happen naturally in the future. But hearing it said so clearly, so concretely, still caught her off guard. "Is that a proposal?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but unable to completely hide the hope in her voice. David smiled. "Not yet. When I ask you to marry me, it will be the right way. With a ring on one knee, the whole traditional package you deserve. Lily." Sarah pulled, changing the subject before the conversation became too intimate. "Come see the view from the kitchen." The girl came running, followed by the real estate agent, a middle-aged man who had spent the last hour trying to disguise his surprise at the unconventional family setup before him. David could see the gears turning in the man's head. Billionaire businessman, clearly lower-middle-class woman, child who treated them equally as parents. "So, what do you think?" the agent asked eagerly. "Does the apartment meet your expectations?" David looked at Sarah, hoping she would respond first. They had agreed that decisions about the apartment would be made together, with veto rights for either of them. "It's perfect," Sarah finally said, and David saw that she was being sincere. "When can we move in?" "Immediately, if you wish. It's ready for occupancy." David nodded. "Let's take it." In the following weeks, the moving process proved to be more emotionally complex than either of them had anticipated. For Lily, it was an exciting adventure. A new room, new toys, space to run. For Sarah, each box packed from the old apartment seemed to carry pieces of her independence that she was leaving behind. David tried to help with the move, but quickly realized that his presence sometimes hindered more than it helped. Sarah had a specific way of organizing her things, work rhythms she had developed over years of living alone, and he was still learning when to intervene and when to step back. Moving day itself was chaotic. David had hired a professional moving company, but Sarah insisted on personally packing the more fragile items, not out of distrust in the professionals, but because each object told a story that only she knew. "This mug," she explained to David, carefully wrapping, "a chipped and yellowed cup, was the first thing I bought when I got my own apartment. It cost $2 at the dollar store, but it represented that I finally had a home just for me and Lily." David watched as she packed each item with reverent care. The first drawing Lily had made in school, a faded photo of her grandmother, a blanket that had been woven by her mother before she passed away, objects with no monetary value but laden with personal history. "Where do you want me to put this?" David asked, holding a small, seemingly dying plant. "Careful!" Sarah exclaimed, rushing to take the plant from his hands. "This is Hope." "Hope? That's her name. She's an African violet that my neighbor Mrs. Johnson gave me when Lily was born. She said if it bloomed, it would be a sign that everything would be all right." Sarah gently caressed the wilted leaves. "It has only bloomed once in 3 years, but it was the day you came into our lives." David felt something tighten in his chest. Every detail of Sarah's life seemed loaded with meaning, struggle, and stubborn hope. Compared to that, his own existence, before meeting them, felt superficial and empty. In the new apartment, they spent the first day trying to decide where to put everything. The new furniture that David had bought, an Italian leather sofa, a mahogany dining table, a 70-inch TV, seemed to directly confront Sarah's belongings. The plastic coffee table that Lily used for coloring, the mismatched colorful cushions, the framed children's drawings in cardboard frames. "It's not working," Sarah murmured, looking at the living room that resembled a battlefield between two completely different lifestyles. What's not working? This, our things together. It feels forced. David looked around with new eyes and saw what she meant. It wasn't a matter of quality or price, it was a matter of history. His furniture had no memories, no stories. They were beautiful, but soulless. "What if we donate some of my furniture?" David suggested. "We keep what you brought and buy a few new pieces together." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You would do that? That sofa must have cost more than my car." "Sarah, furniture is just stuff. You and Lily are what make a place feel like home." It was Lily who resolved the first. Decorating conflict, finding the discussion between the adults. In terms of where to place the TV, she simply grabbed her favorite pillow, a small heart-shaped cushion that Sarah had hand-stitched, and placed it on the floor in front of the giant television. "There," she announced, "now it's right." And it was. Somehow that small, homemade pillow created a bridge between the two worlds, transforming the space into something that belonged to all of them. On that first night in the new apartment, after Lily had fallen asleep in her new room, which she had insisted on decorating with a mix of Disney princesses and dinosaurs, David and Sarah sat on the newly arranged sofa, sharing a bottle of wine and trying to process the day. "How do you feel?" David asked. "Scared," Sarah admitted. "Excited, grateful, confused." She paused. "And you?" "Like I'm living someone else's life. A life better than I deserve." Sarah turned to look directly at him. "David, you need to stop talking like that. Acting like you don't deserve to be happy." "It's hard," he admitted. "For 3 years I believed my life ended with Emily, that I had used up all my quota of happiness. And now—" David looked around the apartment, at the drawings of Lily already stuck on the new fridge, at the hope plant that Sarah had carefully positioned on the living room window, at Sarah herself, beautiful and tousled after a whole day of moving. "Now, I think maybe life gives second chances to those willing to fight for them." Sarah nestled against him, and David hugged her, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, mixed with the aroma of construction paper and paint that always accompanied Lily. It was a smell of home, of family, of belonging. "David." "Yes. Thank you for accepting us in your life just as we are." David gently kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me be part of your lives." Later, when Sarah was already asleep next to him in the king-size bed that took up less than half of the master bedroom, David stayed awake, looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of his new life. Sarah's soft breathing, the occasional rustle of Lily moving in the next room, the distant noise of traffic in New York. For the first time in 3 years, David Johnson slept. Without nightmares, without guilt, without the crushing weight of loneliness. Instead, he slept with the certainty that he had found his place in the world again, not as the successful and lonely businessman he had been, but as part of an imperfect, complicated, and absolutely perfect family in its imperfection. Outside, the city continued its frantic dance of millions of people seeking their own pieces of happiness. But there, in that apartment in Queens, 3 people had found something rare and precious, a home built not with money or status, but with love, patience, and the courage to believe that people from different worlds can create something new and beautiful together. Chapter 9. The Westfield Garden State Plaza in Newark buzzed with the typical activity of a September Saturday afternoon. But for David, Sarah, and Dr. Johnson, the atmosphere felt charged with an almost electric tension. They were sitting at a cafe table in the food court, waiting for the representatives from Smith & Sons Construction to arrive for one last attempt at negotiation before the case moved definitively to court. Lily quietly played with a doll next to Sarah, occasionally glancing at the adults with curiosity. At 3 years old, she had developed a keen sensitivity to her parents' emotions, and David could see that she sensed the importance of the moment, even without fully understanding what it was about. "They're late," Dr. Johnson murmured, checking his Rolex for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "Psychological tactic," David replied calmly, though inside he felt the same anxiety he saw etched on Sarah's face. "They want to make us nervous before the conversation." Sarah said nothing, just absent-mindedly stirred the coffee that had long since cooled. In recent weeks, as the lawsuit gained momentum, she had become progressively quieter about it. David knew she was grappling with a complex mix of hope and fear, hope for the future that money could provide for Lily, and fear that in the end it could all fall apart. "Mommy, those men are coming over here." Lily innocently pointed to a group of 3 men in suits approaching their table. The leader of the group was a burly man in his 50s, with slicked-back grey hair and an expression that David immediately recognized as that of someone used to intimidating opponents in negotiations. Beside him, a younger lawyer carried a leather briefcase and a nervous expression, while the 3rd man, clearly another, more experienced lawyer, observed everything with calculating eyes. "Dr. Johnson," the burly man greeted formally. "I am Edward Smith, owner of the construction company. This is my lawyer, Dr. Roberts, and this is Dr. Brown, the company's legal consultant." The introductions were made with the typical professional coldness of high-stakes negotiations. David noticed how Edward Smith studied him with particular attention. He had likely researched the financier behind Sarah's case. "Well," Edward began as everyone took their seats, "let's get straight to the point. We are here to avoid a long and costly litigation for both parties." Dr. Johnson leaned forward. "We're listening. Our proposal is $2.5 million, paid in full, in exchange for Ms. Thompson withdrawing any claim on the land." The silence that followed was heavy. David saw Sarah pale slightly. $2.5 million was an astronomical amount for someone in her situation, even though it was significantly less than the total value of the land. "It's a generous offer," Dr. Costa added, "considering the costs and uncertainties of a legal process." David observed Dr. Johnson's expression carefully, which remained impassive. "What if we refuse?" Edward smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "Then we will see you in court, where I can assure you we will use all available legal resources to protect our investments." The implied threat did not go unnoticed by anyone. David felt the tension rise and saw how Sarah unconsciously pulled Lily closer to her. "Can I have a moment to talk to my client?" Dr. Johnson asked. "Of course, let's take a walk. We'll be back in 15 minutes for the answer." As the representatives of the construction company walked away, Dr. Johnson leaned in to whisper, "It's a substantial offer, but it's still well below the actual value of the land." "What is your recommendation?" David asked. "Legally, we have a solid case. We could get much more in court. But—" he hesitated. "Litigation is always a gamble, and they have the resources to make this very long and expensive." David turned to Sarah. "What do you think?" Sarah was clearly struggling with the decision. "It's a lot of money, David. More than I ever dreamed of having." "But it's not what you deserve," David replied firmly. "It's not what your great-grandmother left for you. And what if we lose in court? What if we end up with nothing?" David took her hand across the table. "Then we will face it together. But Sarah, if we accept this offer now, we will always wonder, what if? You have fought your whole life for what is right, for what you deserve. Don't stop now." Lily, who had been listening to the conversation without fully understanding, suddenly tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, are those men bad?" Sarah looked at her daughter, and David saw something change in her expression. "No, sweetheart. They are just trying to convince us to accept less than we deserve. Like when the store clerk tries to convince me that I don't need the toy I want." The simplicity of the child's analogy brought smiles to all the adults present. "Exactly like that, Lily." Lily nodded solemnly. "So we don't accept, right? Great-grandma left that gift for us, and we don't trade gifts for cheaper things." The innocent wisdom of the girl cut through all the legal and financial complexities of the situation. David saw tears welling up in Sarah's eyes. "She's right," Sarah said firmly. "My great-grandmother worked her whole life, saved every penny to buy that land. She left this for her family, for me, for Lily. I won't trade it for crumbs." Dr. Johnson smiled. "So, shall we go to court?" "Let's go to court," Sarah confirmed. When the representatives of the construction company returned, they found a transformed Sarah. No longer the hesitant woman they had left 15 minutes earlier, but someone with iron determination in her eyes. "Our answer is no," she said clearly. "The land is worth 15 million, and that's what we want." Edward Smith could not hide his irritation. "Ms. Thompson, you are making a mistake. Lawsuits can last for years. They can cost more than they are worth, and there are no guarantees." "Then why are you so eager to avoid court?" David interjected, his voice laden with challenge. Dr. Brown, the younger lawyer, tried a different approach. "Miss Thompson, think of your daughter. With 2.5 million, she would have a guaranteed future. Why risk everything in an uncertain lawsuit?" It was the wrong phrase at the wrong time. David saw Sarah's face harden completely. "Don't use my daughter to pressure me," she said with a coldness that rivaled David in his toughest negotiations. "I am fighting exactly for her, so she grows up knowing that her mother never accepted less than she deserved, never let herself be intimidated by powerful men." Lily, realizing she was being discussed, stood up and walked over to Edward Smith. With the absolute confidence typical of small children, she looked him straight in the eye. "Do you want to steal my great-grandma's gift?" she asked innocently. The embarrassment on Edward's face was palpable. Here was a businessman used to intimidating opponents, being questioned by a 3-year-old about the morality of his actions. "It's not stealing, kid," he muttered uncomfortably. "It's business. My mom said that when someone takes something that isn't theirs, it's stealing," Lily replied with relentless child logic. David had to suppress a smile. In all his business career, he had never seen a negotiation so effectively shut down by a 3-year-old. "Well," Dr. Brown quickly intervened, "it seems we have nothing more to discuss here. We will see you in court." They stood up to leave, but Edward Smith stopped and turned to David. "Mr. Johnson, I hope you know what you're getting into. Lawsuits like this can become very complicated." David stood up as well, his posture radiating the confidence of someone used to facing much more sophisticated intimidation. "Mr. Smith, I built an empire facing men far more dangerous than you. If you are trying to intimidate me, you are wasting our time." After the construction representatives left, Dr. Johnson turned to his clients. "Well, now it's official. We are going to court." "How long?" Sarah asked. "Probably 18 months, maybe 2 years. It will be a long battle." David held Sarah's hand. "We are ready." Lily, who had returned to her doll, looked up with a serious expression. "Santa Claus and Mommy are going to win, right?" "We are going to win, Princess," David replied confidently, "because we have something they don't." "What is it?" "The truth." As they left the mall, Sarah stopped David for a moment. "Are you sure about this? About facing this battle with me?" David looked at Lily, who was running a few meters ahead, beaming with her new doll, and then at Sarah, whose strength and dignity continued to surprise him every day. "Sarah, I have faced corporate battles for money, for power, for ego. This is the first time I'm fighting for something that truly matters, for my family." That night at home, while Lily was sleeping and they were organizing the documents for the case with Dr. Johnson, David realized that regardless of the final outcome in court, they had already won something far more valuable. They had become a real family, united not just by love, but by the shared determination to fight for what is right, to protect each other, to build a future based on solid principles rather than convenience. The upcoming legal battle would be long and difficult, but David knew they would face it together, and that made all the difference in the world. Chapter 10. December had arrived again in New York, bringing with it the same humid warmth and holiday excitement as a year before. But for David, Sarah, and Lily, everything had changed beyond recognition. The apartment in Queens was decorated for Christmas for the first time in David's life, not with the expensive, impersonal ornaments that used to adorn corporate events, but with handmade decorations by Lily, colorful lights that Sarah had carefully chosen, and a modest tree where each ornament told a story of the family they had built together. David was in the kitchen, making breakfast coffee, a skill he had developed over the past few months, along with many others he never imagined he would need, when he heard the phone ring. It was Dr. Johnson, and by the excited tone in his voice, David immediately knew it was good news. "David, I just received the call from the court. The judge accepted our settlement proposal. The construction company agreed to pay $12 million. David felt his heart race. After 2 years of intense legal battles with appeals, counter-appeals, tense hearings, and moments when it seemed everything could fall apart, they finally had a definitive victory. "12 million, David repeated, trying to keep his voice low so as not to wake Sarah and Lily, who were still sleeping. "Yes, they realized we were going to win the entire case and decided to negotiate before the final ruling. It's a huge victory." David hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the news. $12 million, life completely changed. A guaranteed future for Lily, total independence for Sarah, and more importantly than all that, justice finally served in the name of Sarah's great-grandmother, who had worked so hard to leave something of value for her family. "David? Who were you talking to?" Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing the pink robe that Lily had insisted on giving her for her birthday, her hair messy from sleep. David turned to her, a huge smile spreading across his face. "Dr. Johnson." Sarah immediately became alert. "And?" "We won." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds before Sarah let out a joyful scream that woke Lily, who came running from her room in her unicorn pajamas. "What happened? Why's Mummy screaming?" Lily asked, rubbing her sleepy eyes. David knelt down to her level. "Remember that gift your great-grandma left? Those papers you brought to me last Christmas?" Lily solemnly nodded. "Well, we found out that your great-grandma was very, very clever. She left such a special gift that now you will never have to worry about money again." Lily processed the information with the seriousness of a 4-year-old trying to understand adult concepts. "Does that mean I can have a pony?" David and Sarah laughed simultaneously. "We'll talk about the pony," Sarah said, picking Lily up. In the hours that followed, as they dealt with calls from Dr. Johnson explaining the details of the settlement, David watched Sarah process the new reality. She oscillated between disbelief, joy, relief, and a curious concern that took him a while to understand. "What are you thinking?" he asked, when they finally found themselves alone on the balcony, Lily entertained with her toys in the living room. "I'm thinking about how life can change in an instant," Sarah replied, looking at the city stretching out before them. "Yesterday I was A woman working 3 jobs to support my daughter. Today I am... What exactly? A millionaire. David held her hand. Today you are the same strong, brave and principled woman you've always been, just now with more options. And what if I change? What if all this money turns me into someone different? David turned to look directly at her. Sarah, you spent the last 2 years resisting the temptation to accept smaller settlements, fighting for justice even when it seemed impossible, holding on to your principles even when it would have been easier to give up. If that didn't change, you $12 million won't change you either. Sarah nodded slowly, but David could see she was still processing everything. Moreover, he continued with a smile, I'll be here to remind you of who you are if you ever forget. Always. David stood up and, to Sarah's surprise, knelt before her. From his pants pocket he pulled out a small velvet box he had been carrying for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. Sarah Thompson, he said, opening the box to reveal an elegant but understated diamond ring, exactly the kind he knew she would approve of. You taught me what it truly means to love someone. You showed me that family is not about blood or social status, but about choosing to be present every day. You gave me Lily, who is the light of my life, and you gave me you, who is my heart. Will you marry me? Sarah looked at the ring, then at David, then at the living room where Lily was playing, and finally back at David. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, yes. David slid the ring onto her finger and stood up. Do. Gabriel leaned in to kiss her, but was interrupted by Lily, who had appeared on the balcony at just the right moment. Are you guys getting married? She asked excitedly. We are, Princess, David replied, picking her up. Does that mean you're going to be my real daddy? David looked into the bright brown eyes of the girl who had changed his life. It means I will be your father forever, in every way that matters. Lily clapped her hands and then became thoughtful for a moment. Can I call you Daddy instead of Santa Claus? I would love that. Daddy, 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 Lily shouted, testing the new word, and David felt his heart expand in a way he never knew was possible. That afternoon they went to visit Michael at the bakery to share the news. The bakery was decorated for Christmas with the same warm aroma of cinnamon and coffee that David had learned to associate with important moments in his new life. Oh my, Michael exclaimed when he heard about the settlement. 12 million! Sarah, you're rich! We're rich, Sarah corrected, showing off the engagement ring. David proposed to me. Michael looked at David for a long moment, and David braced himself for skepticism or jealousy. Instead, Michael extended his hand. Welcome officially to the family, he said sincerely. Take good care of them. Always, David promised. And what about your plans? With all that money, I imagine you'll be living somewhere more sophisticated. David and Sarah exchanged glances. They had talked about this over lunch. Actually, Sarah said, we want to use part of the money to expand David's microcredit fund, to turn it into something bigger that can help more families like ours used to be. And we're going to create a foundation, David added, focused on housing rights and legal assistance for low-income families, so that others don't have to fight alone like you did. Michael smiled. Of course you will. I wouldn't expect anything less from you too. That night, after Lily fell asleep, not without making David promise he would still be there when she woke up, a ritual they had kept for months, David and Sarah sat in the living room planning for the future. When do you want to get married? David asked. In February, Sarah replied without hesitation. On the anniversary of when Lily came into your office dressed as Santa Claus. David smiled. Perfect date. David. Yes? Thank you. For what? Sarah gestured around the apartment, to the ring on her finger, to the life they had built. For everything, for accepting us as we are, for fighting with us, for teaching me that we deserve good things. Sarah, I should be the one thanking you. You two saved my life. We saved each other, she wisely corrected. Later, David stayed awake watching Sarah sleep beside him, listening to the soft sounds of Lily in the next room. Outside, New York continued its frantic dance, millions of people seeking their own pieces of happiness, their own forms of love, their own definitions of family. David thought about the journey that had brought them here. A lost child dressed as Santa Claus, carrying documents that no one knew were valuable. A single mother struggling to maintain her dignity while supporting her daughter. A lonely businessman who had forgotten how to live instead of just exist. Individually, each of them was incomplete, battling their own limitations. Together, they had created something greater than the sum of their parts, a family based on choice, mutual respect, and unconditional love. The second Christmas they would spend together would be different from the first. There would be no dramatic surprises or life-changing revelations. Instead, it would be a quiet celebration of something they had built day by day. A home where a former housekeeper, a billionaire businessman, and a girl with dreams too big for her small size had learned that the best gift anyone can receive doesn't come wrapped in golden paper, but in the form of people who choose to stay, who choose to fight, who choose to love despite all the reasons not to.